Welcome to Credit and Coffee. This is a story about the heavy weight of a secret, the unraveling of a life, and the quiet journey towards an earned peace. I remember the chill of that late autumn morning, the kind where your breath plumes in front of you even indoors for a moment before the old building's heating kicks in, and I remember the distinct smell of stale coffee from the pot that had been brewing since 6 and the faint metallic tang of old paper, a scent unique to the office of a company that had seen better decades. I was almost 42 then, a good decade and a half into what I thought was my stable career, a manager of a small department in a business that had been in my boss's family for generations, and it was a role that once felt like a steady perch, but had lately become more like standing on a slowly melting ice floe. The worn carpet in my office, a faded gray that absorbed even the weakest light, seemed to mirror my own dwindling enthusiasm, and the flickering fluorescent hum above me often felt like a personal reminder of the energy draining from my days. I would arrive early, sometimes before dawn truly broke, to the quiet click of my own footsteps echoing down the long, empty hall, hoping that by sheer force of presence I could somehow conjure back the vitality of years past, but mostly it was just me, the stale coffee, and the growing sense of an inevitable slide. My wife and I had bought our first real house 3 years prior, a place with 3 bedrooms and a small patch of grass, nestled in a neighborhood that felt just out of reach but promised a certain kind of future, a mortgage that stretched our income thin even with my decent salary. The street itself was tree-lined, the houses mostly well-kept, a quiet aspiration reflected in the manicured lawns and the gleam of recently washed cars, but our own home, while cherished, felt like a constant drain. We were house poor, a phrase I hated but couldn't deny, perpetually stressed by property taxes, escalating insurance costs that seemed to climb with every passing year, and the relentless creep of inflation that made every trip to the supermarket feel like a financial assault. I would push the shopping cart through the brightly lit aisles, picking up familiar items, and watch with a growing sense of dread as the total on the checkout screen climbed relentlessly, each digit a small, sharp stab of anxiety. We started making concessions, opting for store-brand cereals, passing on the organic produce, a slow, almost imperceptible lowering of our standards that chafed at my sense of providing. I watched the numbers on my personal budget spreadsheet like a hawk, meticulously tracking every dollar, every cent, trying to make the income stretch, trying to squirrel away a little for our future, perhaps even dabble in some modest investments that my friends were always talking about, excited about their new passive income streams or their carefully chosen stocks. But every month felt like a zero-sum game, or worse, a deficit, the balance often teetering precariously on the edge of red. The company itself had been limping along for years, a shadow of its former self, slowly declining amidst bigger, more aggressive competitors, the clunky old machines in the back room sometimes breaking down for days, holding up production, and the once vibrant atmosphere, filled with the hum of activity and the casual banter of colleagues, had been replaced by a quiet desperation, a pervasive sense that we were all just waiting for the inevitable. The once bustling sales floor was often empty, the distant ring of a phone an increasingly rare sound, and the general air was one of hushed anxiety, as if speaking too loudly might awaken the sleeping giant of impending doom. My boss, a kind but increasingly detached man, seemed overwhelmed, buried under the weight of market shifts and dwindling passive income streams, his shoulders perpetually slumped, often disappearing for long stretches into his dimly lit office, the closed door a silent barrier that amplified everyone's anxieties and left a void that we all felt but dared not speak of. He had inherited the business, this grand enterprise that was once the pride of his family, and I could see the sadness in his eyes, the weight of a legacy slowly crumbling. That morning, the opportunity, if you could call it that, presented itself not as a grand scheme, but as a small, almost innocuous crack in the system, a tiny oversight in an antiquated accounting process I'd long managed, a system that relied more on printed ledgers and carbon copies than on digital reconciliation. It was a vendor invoice, a double payment for a routine supply order, easily rectifiable with a quick phone call and an entry reversal, but it pinged in my mind as something else entirely, a momentary flicker of a different path, $10,000. Not an astronomical sum, not enough to fundamentally change our deep-seated financial woes or suddenly make me rich, not a life-altering lottery win that would propel us into a world of carefree investments or early retirement, but enough to offer a temporary reprieve, a breath, a moment of relief from the relentless pressure of bills piling up on the kitchen counter, each envelope a small, white harbinger of demands, from the nagging fear that we couldn't keep up with our mortgage payments. The largest and most terrifying of all our commitments, from the silent worry in my wife's eyes when we talked about school fees or unexpected car repairs, the sudden, sharp intake of breath when the mechanic called with an estimate. It wasn't about greed, not really, but about a desperate, panicked fear of loss, of failing my wife, of losing the life we had painstakingly built, however precarious. The thought itself tasted like ash, a metallic tang of something forbidden, and my gut twisted with a visceral discomfort, a deep-seated revulsion at the mere consideration. I saw the empty coffee cups on my desk, stained with the rings of forgotten mornings, the stack of unread reports waiting for my attention, the gray light struggling through the office window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the stagnant air, and the temptation solidified into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The idea itself was ugly, a betrayal of trust, a moral compromise in a job that had once felt honorable, a role I'd built over years of quiet diligence and steady effort. But the image of my wife's strained smile, the worry etched into her forehead as we discussed the rising cost of groceries, the way she would subtly check the price of everything, every item, every single time, outweighed, for a fleeting, terrible moment, the quiet voice of my conscience. That insistent whisper that usually kept me on the straight path. I told myself it was temporary, a loan, an advance against some imagined future bonus that I knew, deep down, would never materialize, a foolish internal rationalization for an inexcusable act, a mental gymnastics that left me feeling disoriented and sick. I remember the slight tremble in my hand as I moved the mouse, guiding the cursor, making the transfer, the click of the mouse a sound of finality, sharp and resonant in the quiet office, of crossing a line I never thought I would, a point of no return that solidified into an immediate, irreversible reality. There was no exhilaration, no sense of triumph, no rush of illicit success, just a chilling silence that enveloped me, immediately followed by a dull, throbbing ache of guilt, a quiet dread that settled deep in my bones like a cold dampness, as if the very air around me had suddenly turned heavy and oppressive. The money landed in a separate account I'd set up years ago for potential investments, a phantom account I hoped would one day hold our future, a repository for the small dreams we nurtured, but now it felt tainted, a vault for stolen goods, a dirty secret hidden behind layers of digital security. I imagined it sitting there, a bright, dangerous beacon in the otherwise mundane landscape of my financial life, always drawing my eye, always pulling at my thoughts. For the next 2 years, that $10,000 became a spectral passenger in my life, always there, silent but oppressive, a shadow stretching longer than the sun on a winter afternoon, following me into every room, sitting beside me at every meal. It didn't solve our problems, it merely postponed them, a temporary reprieve, allowing us to breathe a little easier for a few months, to pay off some nagging credit card debt that had accumulated from past emergencies, to fix the leaky roof without having to agonize over every penny, to replace the sputtering refrigerator before it died completely, sparing us the immediate panic of a major household expense. The relief was palpable at first, a genuine lightening of the load, but the calm was superficial, a thin veneer over a churning anxiety, a restless eddy of fear that spun beneath the surface of every seemingly normal day. Every time my boss walked past my desk, his footsteps somehow louder, more deliberate, every time an external auditor's name was mentioned in a casual meeting, every flickering shadow in my peripheral vision, a movement of a colleague turning a corner, my heart would clench, a cold sweat breaking out on my palms, and a wave of nausea would wash over me, leaving me lightheaded and breathless. I scrutinized every financial report, every email from accounting, searching for any sign of discovery, a misplaced comma, a suspicious entry, my internal risk management system on hyperalert, humming with an almost unbearable intensity, constantly scanning for threats. The quiet dread became my constant companion, whispering in my ear during restless nights, souring the taste of my morning coffee, making me jump at the unexpected ring of the office phone, each jolt a sharp, unwelcome reminder. I would toss and turn, the sheets tangled around me like a net, my mind replaying scenarios, imagining the moment of exposure, the cold shame of it. Even the simple comfort of my bed became a place of torture. The company continued its slow decline, the pressure mounting on everyone, the whispers of layoffs growing louder, and my boss, growing increasingly despondent, spoke often of scaling back, of laying off staff, his voice heavy with the weight of difficult decisions. I saw the worry in my colleagues' eyes, the quiet desperation in their strained conversations over lunch, the way they clung to every rumor, and my own secret felt like a heavy stone in my gut, a stark contrast to their honest struggle, their genuine fear for their livelihoods. How could I have done this, taken advantage of this crumbling ship, when everyone else was fighting so hard to keep their heads above water, to keep their families fed, to protect what little stability they had left? The hypocrisy gnawed at me, festered like an open wound, making every interaction a fresh source of self-loathing. My relationship with my wife, once a sanctuary of open communication, began to fray at the edges. I grew withdrawn, irritable, quick to snap at trivial things, the smallest inconvenience, always on edge, my nerves stretched thin like taut wires. She sensed the shift, her perceptive gaze often resting on me with a quiet concern, asking if I was all right, if work was getting to me, if there was something she could do. I'd offer vague assurances, a noncommittal shrug, avoiding eye contact, afraid that the truth would somehow seep out through my pores, that my eyes would betray the dark secret I carried. The secret became a wall between us, thick and soundproof, preventing true intimacy, slowly poisoning the well of our shared life, replacing our once easy laughter with a brittle silence. I longed to tell her to unburden myself, but the fear of her reaction, of disappointing her, of seeing that quiet judgment in her eyes, kept the words locked in my throat. I tried to atone in small, futile ways, working longer hours, taking on extra projects, volunteering for tasks no one else wanted, trying to immerse myself in the company's struggles as if sheer effort could somehow erase my transgression, as if exhaustion could somehow purify my conscience, but the shadow persisted, clinging to me like a stubborn, unwelcome scent. I even considered trying to put the money back, meticulously calculating how I might scrounge together enough from our depleted monthly budget. But by then, our savings were too depleted. The initial loan had been absorbed into the churn of everyday expenses, into the fabric of our precarious existence, and the act of trying to reverse it felt like an admission in itself, a further risk I couldn't bear to take. The thought of raising suspicion, of drawing any attention to that particular account, made my blood run cold. It felt like I was trapped in a self-made cage, the bars of guilt closing tighter around me with each passing day. The breaking point arrived not with a bang, but with a whimper, a quiet evening spent watching my young nephew play with his brightly colored building blocks on our living room carpet. His innocent joy, his absolute trust in the world, the unburdened purity of his small, focused gestures as he carefully stacked one block upon another, contrasted so sharply with the murky, dishonest corner of my own soul, a stark, painful juxtaposition that brought a sudden clarity. My wife was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared a simple dinner of pasta and canned tomatoes, the familiar, comforting scent of garlic and basil wafting gently into the living room, a homely aroma that suddenly felt foreign, undeserved. I remember the dim, warm light from the floor lamp, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, tiny specks of life in the quiet stillness, the soft rustle of leaves outside our window, a gentle, evening whisper. I looked at her, truly looked at her, seeing beyond the familiar, seeing the weariness in her shoulders, the slight slump of fatigue that spoke of a day of unseen battles, the unspoken sacrifices she made every day, her quiet strength, and a wave of profound shame washed over me, a tidal wave that threatened to drown me in its icy depths. I couldn't continue living this lie, building our life, our future, our everything on a foundation of deceit, a shaky edifice ready to collapse at any moment. The anxiety had become unbearable, a constant hum beneath every waking moment, a low-frequency vibration that rattled my bones, stealing my peace, corrupting every small joy, every shared smile, every quiet evening. It was a suffocating blanket, heavy and suffocating, and I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating, that I had to shed it. I confessed everything to her that night, sitting on the edge of our worn sofa, the floral pattern beneath my hand feeling rough and real, the words tumbling out in a raw, choked torrent, a dam finally breaking, releasing years of pent-up fear and self-loathing. I told her about the double payment, about the instant, ugly temptation, about the click of the mouse, about the immediate, crushing weight of guilt, about the 2 years of gnawing dread, the constant paranoia, the way it had slowly poisoned me from the inside out. Her reaction wasn't the explosion I had feared, the shouting or the righteous anger that I felt I deserved, but a slow, dawning comprehension, a gradual understanding that spread across her face like a shadow, followed by a quiet, deep sadness that was far more crushing than any anger could have been. It was the sadness of betrayal, of disappointment, of seeing the man she loved revealed as something less than she believed him to be, and it pierced me to my core. There were tears, yes, from both of us, silent tears that traced warm paths down our cheeks, blurring the edges of the dimly lit room, but also a strange, fragile relief, as if a great heavy weight had finally been lifted from our shared space, from the very air between us. The air felt clearer, lighter, though still filled with the echoes of my confession, the vibrations of those terrible, honest words. She listened, her hand eventually finding mine, her grip surprisingly firm, a lifeline in the sudden storm of honesty. "We'll figure it out," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, a promise, a vow, and in that moment, in the raw, aching vulnerability of that shared space, I knew I had done the right thing, even if the consequences would be severe, even if the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty and potential ruin. The truth, however painful, was a start. It was the first honest breath I had taken in years, and despite the tears, a fragile hope began to stir within me. The next morning, with a hollow knot in my stomach and a strange clarity in my mind, a quiet resolve forged in the crucible of truth, I walked into my boss's office. The air in the hallway felt heavy, each step a deliberate, almost ceremonial act, leading me closer to an inevitable reckoning. The door, usually ajar, was closed, a final barrier. I knocked once softly and heard his weary invitation to enter. The conversation was brief, punctuated by long, uncomfortable silences, the ticking of the old wall clock suddenly deafening in the stillness. I laid out the truth simply, plainly, no excuses, no justifications, no attempts to mitigate the gravity of my actions, just the unvarnished facts, letting them hang in the air between us like heavy stones. My voice, though steady, felt thin and reedy to my own ears. His face, usually kind and slightly distracted, hardened into a mask of profound disappointment, a look that spoke of a personal betrayal, not just a professional one. He didn't shout, he didn't rage. He simply looked at me with a profound sadness that spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement of the trust, once so implicit, now irrevocably shattered. His eyes, usually crinkling with a gentle humor, were now shadowed, weary beyond their years. He fired me on the spot, his voice calm, almost weary, explaining that there was no other choice, given the breach of trust and the company's precarious financial state, a company already teetering on the brink. He informed me that he wouldn't pursue legal action, a mercy I didn't feel I deserved, a kindness that only deepened my sense of shame, but that my severance would be minimal and my departure immediate. I was to clear my desk and leave, no goodbyes, no lingering farewells. I gathered my few personal belongings from my desk, the familiar objects now feeling alien and heavy in my hands, a framed photo of my wife and me, a coffee mug, a well-worn pen, each item a small anchor to a life that was now irrevocably gone, severed without ceremony. The silence of my colleagues, who seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, was a palpable weight, a thick, uncomfortable blanket that pressed down on me as I made my way to the door. No one met my eye, and I didn't blame them. The walk out of that building, past the reception area where I had greeted so many over the years, where I had shared countless small jokes and pleasantries, felt endless, a long, lonely journey from one life to another, each step carrying the weight of my past and the stark uncertainty of my future. The receptionist, a kind woman I'd known for years, offered a small, hesitant smile that quickly vanished, unable to hide the pity in her eyes. The autumn air, still crisp and bright, felt like a judgment, each breath a chilly reminder of my fallen state, of the clear, unforgiving light that now shone on my transgressions. I called my wife from the car, parked haphazardly in the employee lot, the engine still running, my voice trembling as I delivered the news, the words catching in my throat. She was quiet, her voice subdued, but her first question was about my well-being, not the job, a quiet act of grace that humbled me, that brought a fresh wave of tears to my eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked, and it was the only thing that truly mattered. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of raw emotions and harsh realities, a plunge into a cold, churning ocean after years of standing on solid ground. Unemployment felt like a branding, a mark of my failure, etched deeply into my sense of self, a scarlet letter visible only to me. The days stretched out, long and empty, punctuated only by the anxious search for work and the endless parade of bills. Our meager savings dwindled rapidly, not just from the lack of income, but from the unexpected expenses that seemed to sprout up like weeds in a neglected garden. A dental emergency for my wife that required immediate, costly intervention, a sudden plumbing issue in the house that threatened to flood our kitchen, the usual cycle of utility bills, property taxes, and insurance premiums that didn't care about my job status or my personal struggles, that kept arriving with relentless, unforgiving regularity. We had to dip into our small nest egg, the one we had optimistically earmarked for future investments, for a modest stock portfolio or a small Bitcoin holding, and I watched in dismay as the numbers on our bank statements shrank, leaving me feeling increasingly exposed, vulnerable, as if the very ground beneath us was eroding. The anxiety of being house poor intensified, morphing into a gnawing fear of losing everything, of having to sell the home we had worked so hard for, the place where we envisioned our children growing up. We cut back drastically, every purchase scrutinized, every meal planned meticulously around supermarket sales and discount flyers, becoming masters of frugal living. The vibrant colors of our life, once painted with the brushstrokes of hopeful dreams, faded to muted tones, shades of gray and beige, stripped bare of non-essentials. My wife, stoic and unwavering, became our rock, her quiet strength a constant source of both comfort and a deep, persistent shame for me, a reminder of my own weakness. We talked late into the nights, huddled under a single blanket, the house quiet around us, poring over our budget spreadsheets, discussing every penny, planning our steps forward, meticulously calculating how many more weeks we could survive on what little we had left. She never once brought up my past transgression as a weapon, never hurled it at me in anger or frustration, instead focusing on what we could do together, pulling us closer even as the world outside seemed to push us apart, her unwavering support a balm to my wounded spirit. In those dark, quiet hours, our bond deepened, forged in the fires of adversity, becoming something more resilient, more profound than I had ever known. I spent months sending out applications, hundreds of them, each one a desperate plea, attending interviews where I tried to project an air of confidence and competence I no longer felt, but my mid-40s, coupled with a gap in my resume and a vague explanation for my departure from my last role, made finding comparable employment incredibly difficult. The hiring managers, often younger than me, looked at me with a polite skepticism, their questions probing, their expressions unreadable. The market had shifted dramatically since I first entered the workforce, valuing different skill sets, demanding faster paces, a fluency in new technologies, and a relentless drive for innovation that I felt ill-equipped to provide. I felt obsolete, trapped, a relic of a bygone era, clinging to outdated skills in a rapidly evolving world. I briefly dabbled in the world of cryptocurrencies, lured by the siren call of quick returns, the promise of making up for my losses, hoping to strike it rich with Bitcoin or some obscure altcoin, a desperate, ill-informed venture born more of panic than of careful analysis. I poured a small sum we couldn't afford to lose, money that should have gone to groceries or a utility bill, into a volatile altcoin, a tip I'd gotten from an online forum, watching in despair as its value plummeted within weeks, a harsh, painful lesson in risk management and the futility of chasing easy money, another spectacular failure to add to my growing list. It was another blow to my already fragile self-esteem, a confirmation of my inability to navigate this new, complex financial landscape, a fresh scar on my already bruised ego. The pressure of being in the sandwich generation also weighed heavily, as my aging parents began to require more of our time and occasionally financial support for their escalating medical bills and household needs, adding another layer of stress to an already overflowing plate, stretching our resources even thinner. My friends, mostly stable in their careers, their children attending private schools, their investment portfolios growing steadily, offered well-meaning but often tone-deaf advice, suggesting I network more or explore venture capital opportunities, their financial comparisons only serving to deepen my sense of inadequacy, of being hopelessly left behind. I felt a quiet desperation, a dull ache that never quite went away, maintaining a facade of normalcy during chance encounters at the grocery store or school pickup, offering vague platitudes about exploring new opportunities, while inside everything was crumbling, the foundations of my life slowly, inexorably cracking. Each smile I forced, each casual conversation, felt like an exhausting performance. The weight of expectation, both internal and external, was immense. Eventually, out of sheer necessity, when our savings had almost completely evaporated and the threat of foreclosure loomed large, I took a job completely outside my field, a hands-on role that required physical labor and offered a fraction of my previous income, a stark reminder of how far I had fallen. It was at a local workshop, fabricating custom metal components, a place filled with the smell of welding fumes and the clang of hammers, a far cry from the quiet hum of an office. It was humbling, exhausting, and utterly unexpected. I found myself working alongside younger men, fresh-faced apprentices and seasoned tradesmen, learning new skills, handling tools I'd never touched before, covered in metal dust and sweat at the end of each long, physically demanding day. My hands, once accustomed to the soft click of a keyboard, now ached with the unfamiliar strain of wrenches and grinders. But there was a strange, unexpected clarity in it, a primitive satisfaction that came from creating something tangible, something solid. The work was honest, tangible, and at the end of the day, I felt a different kind of satisfaction, a simple pride in a job well done, in the aching muscles that spoke of effort, not deceit. We sold our second car, a sedan we'd once prided ourselves on, opting for a single, older, more economical vehicle, downsized our expenses further, cutting back on even the smallest luxuries, and started tackling our debt with renewed focus and almost military precision. Slowly, painstakingly, we began to rebuild, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. The grand dreams of early retirement and extensive investments, of a future filled with passive income streams and exotic travel, faded, replaced by more modest, attainable goals. Keeping our home, providing for our children, ensuring their stability, finding joy in simple pleasures, in the quiet rhythm of our day-to-day existence. My wife found part-time work at a local cafe, adding her steady, consistent contribution, the clinking of coffee cups and the aroma of roasted beans now a part of her daily life. And together we became a lean, efficient financial unit, scrutinizing every bill, celebrating every small victory, every repaid dollar, every extra hour of work, each one a testament to our combined resilience. The silence between us, once heavy with my secret, was now filled with honest conversations, shared anxieties, and a deeper, more resilient understanding, a connection forged in the fires of shared hardship. We learned to find solace in everyday scenes, the warmth of my wife's hand in mine during a quiet evening walk around the block, the simple joy of our child's laughter over a silly joke, his small body vibrating with uncontained glee, the aroma of a homemade meal permeating our small kitchen, a testament to her creativity and resourcefulness with limited ingredients. These moments, once overshadowed by my guilt and the relentless pursuit of more, now shone brightly, illuminating the true wealth of our lives, the richness of connection and honesty, stripped of all pretense. The old house, once a source of constant financial worry, slowly transformed into a true home, a sanctuary built on the foundations of our shared effort and renewed trust. 10 years have passed since that day I walked out of my old office, a decade of quiet rebuilding, of grappling with the profound consequences of my actions, of living with the shadow of my past choices. The memory of taking that $10,000 of the confession of being fired still lives within me, a quiet echo, a permanent scar on my conscience, not a gaping wound but a healed mark that reminds me of where I've been. It serves as a constant, gentle reminder of the slippery slope of moral compromise, of the insidious way fear can warp judgment, of the true cost of fear and deceit, not just in financial terms but in the erosion of one's own soul. But it no longer defines me, no longer casts an oppressive pall over every moment. The raw, searing guilt has softened into a reflective melancholy, a lesson learned deeply and painfully, a wisdom earned through suffering. Our financial situation is still modest, a far cry from the affluent neighborhood dreams I once harbored, the glittering visions of investment portfolios and passive income that once consumed me. We never managed to accumulate significant investments or passive income streams, never became Bitcoin millionaires or stock market titans. We still live in that same house, slowly but surely chipping away at the mortgage, and it no longer feels like a trap but a sanctuary, a home filled with the quiet joys of a life rebuilt on integrity and hard work, a place where honesty now resides. My career path is unconventional, having moved from the workshop into a role that combines my administrative past with a hands-on approach, working as a project coordinator for a small, ethical construction company, overseeing bespoke projects from concept to completion. But it is fulfilling in a way my old job never was. I've found a new rhythm, a different kind of satisfaction in my work, one that doesn't demand moral compromises or constant internal battles. My relationship with my wife, tested by fire, by the deepest kind of betrayal, emerged stronger, more profound, a testament to her grace and our shared resilience. We faced adversity together, stripped away the pretensions, the facades we once held up, and found a deeper, more authentic connection, one built on unwavering honesty. She remains my anchor, my gentle compass, guiding me with her quiet strength and unwavering belief. Sometimes on a quiet Sunday morning, I sit with a cup of coffee, the aroma of freshly brewed beans filling the air, the sun warming my face through the kitchen window, and watch the dust motes dance in the golden light. The walls of our apartment are familiar, worn in places, marked with the passage of time and the fingerprints of our life, but they hold the stories of our resilience, of our struggles and our triumphs. The supermarket menu still requires careful planning, and inflation still rears its head, sometimes with a vengeance, but the constant anxiety no longer dominates, no longer whispers its insidious threats in my ear. I've learned to be truly content with what I have, to appreciate the small joys that abound. The feel of warm sun on my skin, the rhythmic sound of rain on the roof, the quiet presence of my wife beside me, the soft weight of her hand in mine. The pursuit of external wealth, of keeping up appearances, of chasing illusory security, has given way to an inner peace, an understanding that true richness lies in honesty, connection, and the unwavering belief in one's own path, however winding it may be. The $10,000 and the decade that followed taught me everything I needed to know about myself, about love, and about the enduring value of living a life unburdened by secrets. If this story resonated with you, perhaps stirring a memory of your own journey, what's one financial mistake or challenge that ultimately taught you a profound lesson about yourself or your values? Share your story in the comments below. I'd truly love to hear it. And if this message found you at the right time today, please give it a like. Consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And subscribe to Credit and Coffee for more reflections on life, money, and everything in between. What's one small joy you experienced this week that truly warmed your heart?